Okay, hope you enjoyed your lunch. Hope you those folks on Zoom enjoyed your lunch, and thank you for coming back for the afternoon session of Water Everywhere. This is from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. We're doing something called the Conservation Lightning Round. There are lots of issues that surround us that we're engaged in, that we work with partners on, that we couldn't find time to put full-blown presentations together, but it's very important that we talk about these things. So folks are doing each 10-minute presentations on some very important topics that are very relevant to the Upper Delaware River and very important to FUDR and our partner organizations. We are going to start with Kelly Knudsen, who I see up there. Some folks have seen Kelly before. He is the director of something called the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed that is located sort of down basin, him and his staff. He's going to tell us how he works with us as the New York State lead for his watershed-wide coalition, and how we identify and select our policy priorities that we work on both here in New York and also in Washington, D.C. So, Kelly, thanks again for joining us. Glad you're back, and with that, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff, and hey, everyone. I hope that you're having a great Water Everywhere. I'm excited to join you virtually and sad that I can't be there in Hancock with all of you. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm Kelly Knudsen. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Delaware Watershed. The Coalition, we're a network of over 188 nonprofit groups throughout the 4 basin states, working to preserve and protect the watershed through policy outreach and collaboration. So I saw many of our partners on the line, and it's just great to be here with all of you and continue this work in the basin together. For the Coalition, we're really focused on federal and state advocacy and really building our members' capacity to be effective messengers on the issues that we serve. So today I'll be diving a little bit deeper into the federal landscape, and certainly can talk about, how we kind of go and select our priorities, since that's a process that we're kind of renewing going into 2024 and 2025. So apologies, I don't have a formal presentation. I'm just going to provide some updates, and always happy to take kind of questions from all of you on what's happening in Congress and with federal restoration dollars that are continuing into the region. So just a little bit of backdrop. The Coalition, we actually got our start 11 years ago advocating for federal restoration dollars to be funneled into the region. So in 2016, Congress made that dream reality when it passed the bipartisan Delaware Basin Conservation Act into law. If you're not familiar with that bill, it kind of allowed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to create a regional program titled the Delaware Basin Restoration Program, and then allowed federal monies each and every year to flow through the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation manage. So to date, that program and the fund have supported over 195 projects throughout the watershed, totaling about $55 million in grants to partners to complete on-the-ground restoration work. However, each year we know as a coalition that the amount of money requested through proposals exceeds what this foundation and the program is able to fund. So also, this law that passed in 2016 is now expired as of September 30th. So the Coalition, we really serve as that thought leader, that advocate, in the State House in Washington, D.C., to ensure that these dollars and programs increase their funding levels, and that, of course, it's reauthorized, right, to continue these investments into the basin each and every year. So a primary way that we achieve this as a coalition is actually through our annual Hill Day, and that's where we bring advocates to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress. If you're interested in joining us in Washington, D.C., it happens usually the second week of March, and we do have some travel assistance, so we'd love to have your organization talk with lawmakers and express why these issues are important to you and the Upper Delaware River Watershed region. So this year, we were actually fortunate right before our Hill Day to work with Senator Carper, a Democrat in Delaware, and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican of Pennsylvania, to introduce legislation to reauthorize the Delaware Basin Conservation Act into law. So again, I mentioned it had sunset, and we're trying to make sure that these investments continue to fiscal year 2030. So those bill numbers, in case you're interested, the House bill is 1395, and the Senate bill is 654. So during these kind of lobbying meetings in DC, we ask for co-sponsorship, right? And encourage lawmaker offices to vote in favor when the time comes. Obviously, there's a ton of success in New York and beyond of how these on-the-ground projects have benefited congressional members' districts. And it's just great to elevate those partners' voices and those projects for them to kind of see the value and benefit that it brings to their district specifically. So given that this program is a regional bill, it often needs to be attached to a larger piece of legislation in Congress to be considered further. So in 2016, that legislation was the Water Resource Development Act, WRDA, and that's actually up for renewal in 2024. So we're thinking that that could be another good vehicle to attach this bill to and get it passed to continue to fiscal year 24. And actually, what's unique about this legislation is that it aims to change the match requirements, which is oftentimes a barrier of entry to participate in the program. So currently, you may be familiar, it's a 50-50% match. So whatever your organization can supply, the federal government will meet and match that money. With reauthorization, actually new language has been added to aid small, rural, and disadvantaged communities to accessing federal funds by requiring only a 10% match with a 90% of federal investment. So that obviously would kind of flip the coin, change the game, and allow more monies to come into regions like the Upper Delaware watershed and other rural or small communities throughout the basin. We are really optimistic about this legislation getting through the 118th Congress. I know things look a little crazy right now, but we have already seen it kind of pass out of the Environment Public Works Committee in the Senate. So that kind of allows it to be presented on the Senate floor for an upcoming vote. Obviously the House is kind of sorting through speaker statistics, but the coalition has been in close contact with the co-chairs of the House Delaware River Watershed Caucus, formerly staffed by Congressman Delgado. It's now co-chaired by Congressman Fitzpatrick, the Republican of Pennsylvania, and Congresswoman Lisa Rochester of Delaware. And we've been in close contact with them about getting other members of support. Currently, there's about 20 House members within the basin that sit on that caucus and meet frequently to talk about how we support clean water conservation efforts in the basin at large. So another ask of the coalition during our annual Hill Week is to increase funding to the program. And this year we asked for $15 million to support in fiscal year 24. Previously, the program was funded at $11.5 million in FY23, but does receive some supplemental monies.
Kelly, can you hold on just a second? We're having a technical difficulty in the other room, in the in-person room.
Of course.
You sound great online, though.
I appreciate it. It's always hard to do the hybrid.
I could hear you then, Kelly.
Okay. What was the last thing you all heard?
I think I stopped you just moments after it stopped, so
Okay.
maybe
Perfect.
just one previous thought.
Okay. So we talked about, co-sponsorship of reauthorization. Another ask during our Hill Week is to increase funding to the program. This year, we asked for $15 million in fiscal year 24. Previously, the program was funded at $11.5 million in fiscal year 23, but this program thankfully does receive some supplemental funding from the bipartisan infrastructure package that passed. And so that adds another $4 million on top of whatever is appropriated each and every year for the next 5 years. It started out this program at $5 million. So we've doubled it in just a short amount of time since fiscal year 2018. And so we're just, as advocates, as that thought leader, really demonstrating to lawmakers that this benefits our district, this benefits communities, this benefits clean drinking water, habitat, species, economies, and beyond, so that we can see increased dollars more and more each and every year. So a few months back, we actually kind of saw the fruits of our advocacy come to fruition when the House Interior Appropriations Bill included an additional $2 million to increase the program to $13.5 million. And the Senate version actually had maintained levels of funding from fiscal year 23, so that $11.5 million. So obviously not the 15, but still an increase. So what the coalition strategy is just to support that higher number and to encourage as many of our organizations to sign on to letters just saying that as a broad constituency, we support an increase. And we know that these monies can go to good services and use if that gets passed into law. So we sent about 90 organizations attached onto a letter that supported that House Interior Appropriations number. As many of you may know, the House Interior Appropriation bill isn't great. And so an increase at all is shocking, but promising. So recently we learned actually about an amendment that Congressman Molinaro put in to increase that pool of funding by another $2 million. Once the House has kind of selected a speaker, we anticipate that that amendment will be made in order. And so that would provide an additional round of funding for FY24 at possibly $4 million. So that's a significant jump. Again, we're just waiting for that amendment to be made in order, and we'll be supporting it and reaching out to offices, asking for their support to kind of sign on when the time comes. So that's just a little bit of information about kind of what we're doing in Washington, D.C. and in Congress, focusing on federal restoration dollars and increasing those pots of money into each and every district in the watershed. We've held several press events with lawmakers to get them out to these sites. If you on the call are a recipient of Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund and want to do a press event to get the lawmaker out and see the benefits that it has to their district, let us know. We're happy to work with you and get some press and publicity to kind of showcase the great work that you're doing. Now, Jeff mentioned a little bit about how we work with FEDR in Upper Delaware, and we have been a proud partner with FEDR since our inception over 11 years ago, and we really provide resource and capacity to assist our member organizations to advocate for policies in Albany and beyond. So whether that's developing fact sheets, talking points, holding webinars, and more, we can be here as a resource to make sure that you kind of get the tools you need to be effective in those lawmaker meetings. Right now, we're opening up our nominations to determine work for 2024 and 2025. So if your organization has a policy priority, a budget line item, an initiative that you want to see the coalition and our network kind of take on, the opportunity to do so is now. That nomination closes November 3rd and will be brought to our board to kind of be approved, and will shape the work that we do moving forward. But that's kind of the big legislative update that I had from Congress in DC, and I can turn it back to Jeff and to all of you, and hope that you have a great remaining of Water Everywhere.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. Kelly's group really gives us, they're really the eyes and ears for us in Washington, and they kind of close the loop on all that. We work very closely at all levels of government. That operation that kind of keeps us updated on what's going on down there. And our specific role in Kelly's world is with Congressman Molinaro for the most part, our New York, and to some extent our Northeast Pennsylvania Congressman, Matt Cartwright. Sort of tag team on them between the coalition and us, and it's really been a good. Okay. We are pleased and honored to have Julie Tai with us. She is with a very large statewide organization called New York League of Conservation Voters. Julie's down in Manhattan. They have offices in Albany. They probably got offices other way. When we went looking up in Albany for funding for FEDR and the Upper Delaware River watershed, it was Julie who was so critical to helping us do that. She has a long history in Albany at high-level positions within the Department of Environmental Conservation. She knows the landscape up there. Now she's with a big nonprofit out of New York City, and she somehow has found time to help us out. I don't even know how we got her, but we're really happy to have established that relationship. Julie, hello. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. Thank you so much for having me, and it's been a good day here in New York. Actually, I just came this morning. I was at a press event with the governor where they announced the next round of renewable energy projects in our state, totaling over 6 gigawatts of clean energy. So it's an exciting day, and I'm happy to be talking about water. As Jeff mentioned, I'm Julie Ty. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters and the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. As Jeff mentioned, we're a statewide advocacy organization that fights for clean water, clean air, renewable energy, and open space through political action. And on our education fund, we seek to educate, engage in New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment on a variety of stakeholder issues and using a variety of tools. I will be remiss if I do not remind you, early voting starts on Saturday and runs through November 5th, and then election day is on November 7th. Don't forget, if you want to elect people who care about the environment, first thing you need to do is vote. But today I'm here to talk about the Bond Act a little bit. So we know last year we all worked together, and thank you to so many groups to help to educate your members and to encourage people to get out and vote on the Bond Act. But we were very fortunate that 67% of New Yorkers voted yes on the $4.2 billion Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. We're very excited that there was bipartisan support, and we saw that really cut across the board, through many of our counties. Almost all counties voted yes for it. As a refresher, there's basically 4 big buckets of funding that are available for grants. $650 million for water quality and resilient infrastructure. That includes programs to help address agricultural runoff, to support farm preservation, for soil and water conservation district, for replacing lead service lines. We have $650 million for open space preservation and recreation. So that's for land acquisition. That could be for easements, for state and local governments, and for not-for-profits. I mentioned farmland preservation. There's also soil and water conservation districts that would be eligible. There's some funding for state fish hatcheries and for DEC to do some of that work. There's $1.1 billion for restoration and flood risk reduction, $100 million just for coastal rehabilitation and shoreline restoration. That'll be managed by DEC with local governments and nonprofits. There's also, for the first time ever, a proactive buyouts for structures in high flood risk areas that's going to require willing sellers, and land must be used after it's purchased or protected for flood protection purposes or passive recreation. And that's a whole new program. So that's probably a little further behind than some of the other programs will be as far as when they're going to start rolling out. There's a $1.5 billion for climate change mitigation. These are going to be, in some cases, there'll be community-based grants. There'll be funds for environmental justice organizations, for projects to reduce air and water pollution, urban heat reduction, cooling centers, urban forestry projects, and carbon sinks, working with nature and working lands. There's also funding, $500 million for electric school buses and $400 million for decarbonization of state and municipal buildings, as well as public schools. We know that there's 35% at least of the funds have to be directed into disadvantaged communities. We have what that's going to look like, where that's going to go is in the process of being further defined. We know that earlier this year, the Climate Justice Working Group established criteria using 45 indicators to help identify what those disadvantaged communities are. But it is something that is going to be, critical as the state figures out where and how the dollars are going to be spent. So we know that all of this is going to help, to Kelly's point, right? It's going to help us leverage other funding. Kelly was talking about how, there's a split in how much you have to have as a match. Regardless of what the federal government chooses to put in as far as how big or small that is, if it's changed to be a smaller share, it'll help us to leverage more federal dollars having the Bond Act for projects. And it's expected that the $4.2 billion investment will leverage about $8.7 billion in spending that we know will help to generate jobs. So because just like the federal government, oftentimes the state government requires some local match for projects. And I would expect that will be the same as we move forward here. So it'll help us leverage that local dollar. It'll help us leverage this federal dollar, not just from appropriations like Kelly talked about, but from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as some private sector investment. So it's a really exciting opportunity. So now we're moving into the implementation phase, right? It's been almost a year since the law was passed, adopted by the voters. Right now, the state has been engaging through many months in the summer to do a multi-month educational listening tour to get input from experts and community members about local needs, both in like what their programs should look like, as well as what types of projects could potentially be interesting to be funded with the Bond Act. So they are creating this more transparent approach, and the state has created a website that people can use to look at what's happening with the Bond Act there. We know that the state is going to continue to use these opportunities to help have transparency for the public and stakeholders who are engaged. This is not going to be a quick process, right? The fact is, like, the state has not rolled out many programs yet. You know, it is expected that it's going to take between 5 and 10 years to spend, or at least obligate, all of the funds from the Bond Act, which is not unusual. It often takes time to do that. You know, the two programs that I'm aware of that have been funded so far, one is there were funds from the Bond Act for the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act funds and the intermunicipal grant funds, which are administered by the Environmental Facilities Corporation. They've been rolling that dollars out. It's an existing program that basically the Bond Act contributed more money to, right? That's for critical water, wastewater infrastructure and drinking water infrastructure projects, by and large, that go to municipalities and water and sewer districts for the program. So that rolled out, and not surprisingly, that was the first program to roll out because, again, it was an existing program. Just in September, the governor announced the first round of funding for zero emission school buses. So that was the second one, and they did a small, announcement about what the program criteria were going to be for that. So now the agencies, and this is not just DEC, it's also state parks and Department of State and Department of Agriculture and Markets, are all going through the process to identify what exactly the programs are going to be, in particular for things that are new. So as I specifically mentioned, you know, the buyout program in flood prone areas, they have to identify first what areas are really flood prone and how further taking what's in the law and making sure that people know what areas are even eligible, and then figuring out how it's going to be administered. So the state is going through that process now, and I would expect that this will pick up steam in the next few months. But certainly for projects, in the Delaware River, I would expect that there will be some of the water quality and resilient infrastructure funding programs will be something that would be of interest. Certainly, some of the open space preservation and recreation funding would be of interest, as well as the restoration and flood risk reduction funding. So I would expect that there'll be funding in each of these buckets that would be of interest and able to be leveraging those dollars that Kelly was talking about, and to help with implementation of the plan that was put together to help with the Upper Delaware River. So more to come. We're still in the learning process about how this is all going to be spent, and but there are going to be, I think, by and large, competitive grants that make it happen.
Great, thank you, Julie. So we're still talking about state funding. Sherry's going to talk about a funding source that's happened over the last couple of years here that we are particularly proud of. It was, I think, me, Sherry, and Molly. It was just a kernel of an idea a few years ago, and all of a sudden it happened, with help from many partners, including groups in this room like the Upper Delaware Council and our Land Trust Friends and Trout Unlimited. So Sherry, take it away and tell us what's going on with our New York State funding.
Hey, hi, everyone. I am Sherry Resty Thomas, and I'm going to be talking to you about state funding for the Upper Delaware River. Some background. No. Jeez. So, in 2017, the Federal Delaware River Basin Conservation Act, also known as the DRBCA, was passed, and the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, DWCF, we love acronyms here, was created. In fiscal year 2018, there was $5 million funded, and it required a 1-to-1 non-federal match. 2018, for the first time ever, FUDR received funding from the William Penn Foundation to secure funding for the Upper Delaware River watershed from New York State. Delaware River was only one of 2 to 3 watersheds in New York State without dedicated state funding. In 2020, FUDR organized the Alliance for the Upper Delaware River Watershed to help advocate for New York State funding. Also in 2020, COVID happened, so that delayed things a little bit. In fiscal year 2022-2023, FUDR was awarded a $300,000 line item in the New York State budget within the Environmental Protection Fund to develop and implement an Upper Delaware River watershed program that considers the headwaters down to Port Jervis. This line item was not in the governor's budget, but added through the New York State legislature. Not sure if anyone realizes the advocacy work that's needed to make this happen. This was a huge, huge deal for us. Many thanks to our New York State Assemblywoman, Aileen Gunther, and our other partners, New York League of Conservation Voters, TU, Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, Upper Delaware Council, New York Audubon, among many others, who helped make this happen. It was down to the wire and super stressful. We weren't even sure it was going to happen. One of our partners in Albany took a picture of the line item. That's this thing that you're looking at with the red circle around it. And it was in the budget, and they texted it to us. And a copy of this is taped to the wall behind me. It was huge.
By the way, the budget document is about stacks, and that's what we, figured out.
Hold on, we're having some technical difficulties. Yep. Okay. So, next slide. The Upper Delaware River Watershed Program will engage multiple watershed stakeholders and will identify and implement watershed protection projects that improve water quality, mitigate flooding, restore aquatic habitat, and enhance recreational opportunities through the development of an action agenda, along with the development of a re-grant program. This program complements the pillars of the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, that DWCF that we've been talking about, and will also help to provide that much-needed 1-to-1 match. Fiscal year 2023-2024, FUDR was awarded a second round of funding for $350,000 in the New York State budget under aid to localities to continue this work. This second round of funding did make it in the governor's budget, which was much less stressful and way more fun. We are currently working on the fiscal year 2024-2025 funding. Fiscal year 2022-2023 New York State deliverables. These are the things that we needed to do. Formation of a steering committee and an advisory committee. Develop an action agenda in collaboration with New York State DEC and our steering advisory committees. Begin to develop a re-grant program with the steering and advisory committees, and implementation of 3 named projects. And we've talked about these earlier today. One was the Highland Access, which was we helped to fund a boat launch and signage on the main stem of the Delaware River. Project lead was Sullivan County. Little Beaver Kill Waterline Restoration, it's located in the hamlet of Livingston Manor. Their water line was exposed and it's now covered and new habitat was created. The Mongop Stream Restoration, there was a large failing bank that was restored and new habitat was created. There's some pictures of these. The Little Beaver Kill Waterline Project, in that first photo you can kind of see the exposed pipe. Mongop Restoration, and the Highland Access. At the Highland Access, we did hold an event there in August. It's called the Day on the Delaware, to showcase this access and to highlight just how many partners it takes to complete a project. It's also a great example of how our new state funding will help match federal funding. Congressman Molinaro was there, as well as Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther, Sullivan County Planning Department, Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, the Upper Delaware Council, along with many of those other partners that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Sherry. Sherry's not kidding how much work that took to get that off the ground. One of the secrets of getting funding in Albany, maybe anywhere, is once you're in, you're in. So crossing my fingers, and we're trying not to jinx it, but indications are in the 3rd year looking good, even though New York State's going to have a really tough budget year. And the whole discussion of Albany is about housing, or lack thereof, and we're trying to angle our issues into that. We're talking about something now. We hope that we're in the governor's budget when she proposes it in January, which makes life a whole lot easier than have to slog it out in the legislature all through the spring. So, all good stuff. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Hi, my name is Kyle. I lead the Acquisition and Stewardship Program for the Orange County Land Trust. We're a nonprofit that works with voluntary landowners to protect places that are special to them, while also, enhancing public benefit. So really, I want to talk to you guys about kind of the 3 main conservation tools that we use in our work. The first one is our bread and butter, our conservation easement. Of course, real estate is a bundle of rights: water rights, mineral rights, development rights. An easement conservation easement is where we take an interest in the property by restricting how it can be developed. We work with the landowner to identify the high conservation values, the attributes that we want to protect, and then we'll work with them to align the existing uses of the property so that it can protect those conservation values. Important to note that, we want to work with them to allow them to continue farming, to allow them to continue conducting forestry if that's how they currently use and enjoy the property. So that's our first main conservation tool. Important to note that does not necessarily mean public access or anything like that. Sometimes that can be confusing. That's sometimes when we use our secondary tool of public access or a trail easement, which is pretty straightforward oftentimes. We just pick a part of property where we want to connect a trail to another trail and work with the landowner to do that. But again, those are 2 separate things we're talking about. The last main conservation tool I'll talk about is just simple land acquisition. What we call fee simple, where we're buying all of the rights that's associated with a real property. And, those oftentimes we're acting as a matchmaker between grant funding and some kind of local entity that wants to own and manage a property. In many ways, we don't hold onto these properties long-term because of the expense associated with that. We want to work with the county, the state, the town, to make some really cool parks and work with them. And these are just a couple of the examples that I'm happy to speak to. Just one example is our Sugarloaf Mountain project. This is a project, a mountain that has been, it seems like every single local has some kind of story about trespassing in their use of that mountain. This is in central Orange County in the town of Chester. So we're unlocking public access. There also is a bunch of buildings on the property that the state would not have an interest in owning, and so we're going through the process of subdividing it off to facilitate the transfer of the undeveloped portions as a park to the state and the county. So that's just one example. Greenwood Forest was another one where, a property comes up on the real estate market, just listed. The state and other government agencies can take a long time to purchase that property. And so we step in, we buy it, we do any kind of restoration work that gets needed in order to ultimately transfer it and facilitate the protection into the future. These two water quality programs, I'll go into deeper dive in the next slide. And then last one, a big part of our theme for Orange County, as well as the surrounding areas, is farmland protection. It's a big part of our economic, as well as cultural engines for the area. And that's really, I think, one thing that people tend to think less about. They'll think about the physical infrastructure in order to support farming, but they also need to think about the human infrastructure that goes along with it. The farming community is a small world, and you need a lot of people to help out. And we don't want to witness any kind of collapse of farming in the local area. And so really one of the big aspects of that is making sure that we can have enough farmland so that we can maintain it in perpetuity. And of course, another big part of this is making sure that we can keep farmland affordable by reducing the amount that it costs to purchase protected farmland, as well as keeping it in the hands of farmers. We have restrictions that require the land to be farmed. So that's just one example of a main theme. So this water quality program I really want to do a deeper dive into is in the Port Jervis area, city of Port Jervis, right at the tri-state border of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, where the Neversink meets the Delaware. So this is a big project we're working on. The city had this really great asset, this large contiguous 2,000-acre plus forest with a bunch of existing reservoirs on city-owned land. They did a phenomenal job at turning that underutilized asset into a really great park with mountain biking, hiking, bird watching, all that kind of stuff. Definitely a big area for outdoor enthusiasts to now come out. And we're working with them to expand onto that existing park. So we're in partnerships with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which provides about 75% of our funding for these acquisitions, as well as the Open Space Institute, which provides about 25% of the funding for these acquisitions. We're working with them to buy up adjacent pieces of land, including a large 400-plus acre property here, another 500-acre property up there, to add additional, recreation trails, as well as protect, the large contiguous forest that, helps make the local residents more confident in their drinking water supply, both the recharge as well as quality and filtration. And again, really phenomenal to be able to have all of these partners working together to benefit both water quality as well as recreation. So this is just an example of one of the projects that we do, and this is specifically through the Water Quality Improvement Program at the DEC. And this, I just wanted to briefly bring up, I can spend a whole hour talking about our modeling process of how we prioritize the allocation of resources, but I merely want to say that, conservation, you can't conserve everything. There needs to be room for development, and really one of the most important aspects of our work is allocating our limited resources in the most efficient, effective way, and this is how we do it. We use a variety of data sets that really helps us kind of take a bird's eye view at the region-wide level, and then we use that so we can get a little bit more deeper down into the more qualitative, working directly with the landowners to know exactly about special things about their property. I mean, one of my favorite parts of my job is meeting with these landowners. They're there for 10, 20 years, and they know a lot more about their property than I ever would. It's really cool to get that sense of their sentimentality of the land and whatnot. And this is just an example of some of the data sets we might use. You can kind of think of it as like baking a cake, where you've got this ingredient list, and then we use different, ratios or weightings of these criteria in order to, target a specific thing. Water quality, we're going to be thinking more about forests and, watersheds and that kind of stuff. Whereas, farming, we're going to be thinking more, of course, about agricultural soil. So we'll change up the weighting of those data sets in order to identify the really high value areas that we're, going to do some outreach in, work with some landowners, again, all voluntary and whatnot. So, I think that's everything that I wanted to get across in terms of my side of land protection. Of course, we work in and around Orange County. We don't dive too much into Sullivan County, but that's really where Trey comes in. So I guess with that, I'll hand this over to Trey.
Thanks, Kyle. I have can we switch seats?
Yes.
You can be on camera over there. I noticed that about 30 seconds into sitting down. read it. As I pull this up, I just want to say, Kyle and I do similar work with similar organizations in, the Delaware River watershed. He talked about the overlap that we have in Sullivan County. All of that is to say, please forgive me at the start for any repetition of information you just got from Kyle. I'm just going to give a brief look at our organization, try and keep on time here. Delaware Highlands Conservancy is not showing up there. No one can see it.
Yeah, have to go to the Zoom.
Stop share, and then maybe I can share again, and look at that. Glad I turned around. That was very embarrassing. So Delaware Highlands Conservancy is a private, nonprofit land trust. We're founded in 1994, so we're turning 30 very soon. We're an accredited land trust, which means we follow the standards and practices of the National Land Trust Alliance. And so far, we've protected almost 19,000 acres in our 4-county service area. So you can see our mission there. Like Kyle, we care a lot about clean water, we care about working farms, we care about working forests, and we try to conserve them. Maybe I can advance the slide? Yeah. So our service area is both New York and in Pennsylvania. We have Delaware and Sullivan counties in New York, and then Wayne and Pike in PA. Our headquarters is on the only piece of land that we own, which is 144-acre reserve in Beach Lake, Pennsylvania. We also have a seasonal office in Berryville. This is the reserve. If you want to come out and hike on some of our over 3 miles of trails, you're welcome to do that from dawn to dusk. And if it's snowy, you can even get out there and do some cross-country skiing. My colleague Kaylin in the back has done that. So we have education programs in addition to our land conservation program, and we're working on the development of an education center there on our reserve. So our land conservation program generally, it's our goal to help private landowners who want to conserve their land do so through voluntary conservation easements. And kind of our overarching goals for that, right? We want to protect the clean water and the natural beauty and the wildlife of the region. We want to maintain connections between habitats. We want to support sustainable agriculture and forestry. I really appreciate what Kyle was saying about, the need to keep that critical mass of agriculture and forestry as well. You need the land to do it. You need all the ancillary businesses that support that industry. And you lose the land, you lose those businesses, you lose the economic benefit that they create and provide. And then we also try to contribute to resiliency and ecosystem services through the conservation of these lands. And in the end, we're trying to achieve permanent conservation in general without removing land from private ownership or requiring public access. Our primary tool for that is conservation easements. Just a few notes on those, maybe a little deeper dive to provide some context for those who aren't familiar. Voluntary and legally binding. We work with each landowner that we're engaged with to individually tailor our easements to their goals. I know some programs, thinking of perhaps DEP, has less flexibility in their terms. And then we're trying to protect those important conservation values that are listed on the screen, and I won't bore you with reading. So things to note about easements: the landowner retains ownership. They continue to use the property, they can sell it, they can bequeath it to heirs. And when they do that, they're doing it subject to the conservation easement, because that easement runs with the land in perpetuity. Then our role would come out and to conduct annual monitoring and enforce the terms of those easements, and all of it is that goal, balancing the continued use of the property with meaningful and perpetual conservation, protection of the conservation values. Things we might restrict, you can see there on the screen: development, subdivision, dumping, waterway disturbance, things that would harm what we're trying to protect. And then reserved rights, this is what we really want landowners to continue doing. We want you to continue sustainably farming and the land and sustainably conducting forestry activities. we want you to do any kind of wildlife habitat improvement or restoration projects that you're interested in pursuing. I include this passive recreation up there because sometimes I talk to people and they say, oh, if I put an easement on my land, that means I can't hunt, or that means I can't fish anymore, and not true. Please do those things, and invite me. Then limited and appropriate subdivision, not turning it into a giant 300 house development, but if it's 1,000 acres, cutting that up into some 250 acre, 500 acre things doesn't harm conservation much. So what makes a good conservation easement? This is kind of a much simplified version of the overlay analysis that Kyle was talking about, which is pretty exciting to hear. Things we look for, we want greater than 20 acres within our service area. Adjacent to protected land is always valuable. We have an eagle watch program, so we care very much about bald eagles in the region. That habitat, we're always looking to protect. Resilience and ecosystem services. And then, to dovetail a little bit off of the planning work that FUDR is doing, we want to contribute to the public benefit as, defined in federal, state, and or local plans. And of course, we don't expect every property to have all of these things. So a couple examples recent from this year. This is a project we did, a conservation easement that we did in town of Highland in Sullivan County. So this was adjacent to an existing piece of DEC land. It has significant wetlands and streams on it, and we wanted to conserve the services that those are providing. They're cleaning the stream, they're dealing with stormwater, slowing it down. And then another one, which I've been looking at the FUDR logo all morning, because this is right there. It's our conservation flats or confluence flats easement that we did this year is at the confluence of the east and west branches on the Pennsylvania side of the river. And so this is about 64 acres with over a mile of frontage on the west branch of the main stem, and then a fair portion of Sheehawken Creek as well. And these easements, I'm putting them up here as examples of projects, but they're still private land. They're not open for public access, and like Kyle's statement earlier, our easements don't require that. So with that, I hope I haven't gone too far over. Here's some context if you want to hear me rant at you longer. So thanks.
And is Erin on? Erin McGrath from Audubon, and are you with us?
Yes, just coming off mute and starting to share. And I'll follow up on talking about some of these traditional strategies to protect land by talking about a third route, which is how we can protect land through policy. One of the big changes that we've seen in the past couple of years was that we made updates to the New York State Freshwater Wetlands Law, which allowed us to protect an additional 1 million acres of freshwater wetlands throughout New York State. We had been facing a problem ever since 2001, when the Supreme Court decided that adjacent wetlands, isolated wetlands, and a few other types of wetlands did not really meet the definition of waters of the United States. We've been trying to fix that in New York State for a couple of decades now. And we were lucky that last year, the legislature and Governor Hochul approved legislation that allowed us to protect those additional acres. Because before that, the New York DEC could only regulate wetlands if they were 12.4 acres or larger in size, or if they were of unusual local importance. But the biggest problem was that they had to be on maps that were maintained by the DEC, and lots of those maps were out of date. You can actually see on the right side of my slide that you can see where the DEC's mapping failed. All of those green splotches are freshwater wetlands, and the orange outlines are those that were actually contained on the DEC maps. So you can see immediately that a lot of wetlands were left out of the protection scheme that we had, but fortunately this new legislation addressed that. And oops, let me go back to the previous slide. The way that we did that was by getting rid of the maps that had been so slow to be updated. Now those maps are just going to be maintained for educational purposes, but otherwise, you know, the way that we're going to identify wetlands is by going out and seeing, hey, is this land wet? Does it have hydrophilic plants? Does it have wetland dependent species that are using it? This is going to allow us to capture much more of the wetlands that are currently in New York State and allow the DEC to permit them. We will be using a scheme that is similar to the one that was in place. So the DEC will be mandated to do permitting for all wetlands that are 12.4 acres or greater in size. And then for smaller wetlands, we are going to use unusual importance criteria, but those are pretty expansive. So that will include wetlands that help to attenuate significant flooding, that help to filter drinking water, that provide habitat for rare or threatened species, and those that are located in urban wetlands, which will include large portions of the Hudson Valley, of New York City, and Long Island. Also, once we've had the new program up and running for a couple of years, we're going to lower those thresholds. So the mandatory permitting threshold will drop to 7.4 acres. Additionally, the DEC is going to be working on creating a lot of new maps and resources to allow landowners and conservation organizations alike to figure out where wetlands are and which ones are in need of protection. The DEC is actually currently working with Cornell to use artificial intelligence to map freshwater wetlands throughout New York State. This has been proven to be very effective. It usually picks up about 98 to 99% of the wetlands in a certain area, but we're also going to be looking to local organizations to help identify vernal pools and also to fact check those maps to make sure they're as accurate as possible, because that is going to be the first line where DEC staff or landowners are looking for wetlands to make sure that they're applying for the proper permits. So where we are right now and why I'm talking to you today is that even though we've changed the law, we still need to update the regulations that guide the New York State Freshwater Wetlands Program. So we're going to need to update in terms of the acreage, but also we need to define all of those unusual importance criteria that I talked about on the previous slide. So what does it mean that a wetland has a rare or threatened species on it? Does that mean absolutely everything on the ENT list and also species of greatest conservation need? Or are we going to need to have a set of species before we consider those? Those are all things that are being discussed right now, and eventually the DEC is going to be looking for input on that from all of you as well. So our expectation in terms of timing over the next couple of months is that in the next month or two, the DEC is going to be releasing a regulatory pre-proposal. So that means that they'll be releasing draft regulations that the public and environmental organizations can comment on, but not going through a formal comment period. This is so that they can get initial feedback and revise and adjust the regulations to be as strong as possible. Once they have that initial proposal reviewed, they're going to issue formal regulations, which will be subject to a comment period and also have a more specific avenue for feedback. And once those are done, we'll be able to move into the enacting period of the law. And it's always been really important that we get these regulations right. But recently, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Sackett v. EPA that the waters of the United States, which includes wetlands and intermittent streams and rivers and oceans, they narrowed that definition significantly. It actually eliminated protections for 60% of the nation's wetlands. They lost all of their federal protections from the Army Corps of Engineers. So now the DEC is going to have to pick up a lot of those protections. So we want to make sure that New York State has the strongest regulations possible, given that we are the last people standing between these wetlands and potential elimination or degradation. So because of that, we're going to need everyone to weigh in and support the development of strong ecologically based regulations that protect these critical ecosystem services the wetlands provide. There's going to be a lot of people who want the regulations to be looser, agricultural interests, developers, other folks who are building critical infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we're balancing the needs of all these stakeholders. And because of that, we'll be turning to all of you to come out in support of the regulations. But we'll keep everyone up to date on that. If you're involved with the Save New York State Wetlands Coalition previously, you should continue to get updates. And if not, feel free to reach out to me or Sherry or Jeff, and we can loop you into those efforts. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You hope you can stay with us till the end. We may have some questions.
I'm very fortunate to have been able to be working with Friends of the Upper Delaware for a while now on policy and regulatory issues, in particular related to the Clean Water Act. And we're going to do just a little speed dating with the Clean Water Act and water quality standards here in the Upper Delaware for a few minutes. So I know you've been sitting for a bit, so give me a couple stretches. I can see you all just so that I know that you're still awake after lunch. And yes, okay, I can. Thank you. So many of you may not know what water quality standards are. Many of you might know and think I don't care about them, but I hope after this little bit of time that with us together, you will think that you do care. So for example, things you might care about, how we maintain the high quality fisheries in the Upper Delaware, or how we protect water quality for swimming, perhaps how we protect source water for drinking, both from groundwater and surface water in the Upper Basin. All these things do tie back in some way to roles that water quality standards can play. I'm going to touch on what they are, where you find them, who develops them, and how we can make them better. Now, this is a little shift from you've heard about money, you've heard about land protection, you've heard about ways laws can work in both of those areas, and this is my chance to tell you about something else. So starting with what water quality standards are, there are three parts that I want us to remember. The first part is about the uses in the Delaware River. In the Upper Delaware, and in New York State, they classify groups of uses in the water body, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So think about classification as grouping of uses. The second part is how we determine the levels of pollutants or the conditions that are necessary to not harm those uses, and those are called water quality criteria. There will not be a test on this. The third is how we want to protect existing water quality, that which we already have. The Upper Delaware River is such a beautiful place and has a lot of high quality water. That's called anti-degradation. Those three parts make up the water quality standards. Focusing on the classification or the grouping of uses piece, we're going to talk about three of the classes, and there are many others. But we're going to talk about Class A, which is focused mostly on drinking water, Class B, focused mostly on swimming, and Class C, focused mostly on fishing. But the fishing is a kind of a way to talk about aquatic life. So the healthy aquatic life that allows us to have fish to catch. So the levels of protection for water quality, these water quality standards, the uses in the standards, are tied to that use. So for drinking water, this is not exhaustive, but we might think about toxic contaminants. We might think about sediment that could block a wastewater treatment plant or something. A drinking water treatment plant. So we need to think for swimming, if we are possibly going to ingest some of the water while we're swimming, we want to be concerned about or think about bacteria levels. And if we're thinking about fishing or aquatic life, we're going to think about a lot of different things, contaminants, but dissolved oxygen and temperature are two key examples to think about how to tie the uses to the levels of pollutants that we, or conditions that we need. So where you find these kind of things that are actually assigned to every water body in New York, every water body in Pennsylvania. In the case of New York, it's the Department of Environmental Conservation that we focus on, and they are setting these standards, and they have borrowed on some even that were in place before the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972 that gave the authority to all the states to set these standards. So there, you can Google this, water quality standards in New York, and you'll get to this page and can dive in a lot more if you want to. But what do they look like when you get there? They tie again the class, for example, class A, to water supply, not just for drinking, but also culinary purposes and processing. It's a grouping, as I said, a bundling of the water supply, the recreation, and fishing in the case of class A. And an example of a criterion is that we want to pay attention to chlorides, and they have to be at less than 250 milligrams per liter to protect the most sensitive use in that grouping, which is drinking water. In the class B, the most sensitive use, it includes recreation for swimming and boating, again, thinking about when you might ingest the water. It also includes fishing, the aquatic life, but we're going to think about the most sensitive use for bacteria. One example that they have in the standards is fecal coliform, which has to be less than 200 colonies as they measure it for 100 milliliters of water. Just an example. For class C, we are thinking about aquatic life, things that we need to protect. For example, dissolved oxygen has to be at least 5 milligrams per liter. Dissolved oxygen, you want more of it in the water. Where trout are spawning, it actually has to be 7 milligrams per liter or more. So that's just examples of the class to the uses to how you protect them. Here's the fun part. So some parts of the basin that you know, here's Hancock, Deposit, Cannonsville Reservoir, and we're gonna look at, this is Sands Creek, and Sands Creek is a thick blue line, which is a class C water. So again, as a reminder, that's for aquatic life or fishing. And it also has a TS associated with it over here where my cursor is in the legend. That's for trout spawning. So in addition to the A, Bs, and Cs, that the state has assigned these places where they've identified where either trout are present, which is a T, or trout are spawning, which is a TS, or protecting the areas for trout to spawn. So other examples are here on the part of the West Branch below Deposit is green, and that's a recreation assignment. So it would be swimming, boating, as well as aquatic life. And there is an assignment there for the trout, just T, because it's trout presence. And another example is down here below Hale Eddy, where we've got an assignment for, on the West Branch still, for A, but it's AT. So it's also a grouping, like I said, drinking water, recreation, and aquatic life. And in this case, they've identified trout in that area. And a lot of you know a lot of the places where the trout are here, I know. So
Gail,
one of the,
I
yes.
just want to give you a 2-minute warning.
Got it. So getting to this one piece here, where we're looking at how there are some segments, in this case they're purple, where they're only C for aquatic life or fishing, but they don't assign a trout or a trout spawning letters. So there are places where FUDR has been looking at these pieces where we're not catching all the uses. And that's part of the water quality standards and part of what TU has been helping us with in these mappings, and FUDR has been focusing on. So I'm going to skip this one, which is about how assessment, the area is not fully assessed, and just say that we can make these areas better. We can make these standards better by thinking together how and whether all the uses are identified? Are the conditions established that protect those uses? And are we paying attention to potential threats to those uses that might be everyday threats, like how the roads are maintained or how campgrounds are maintained, or it could be some, for example, in Sullivan County where there's development pressures and resorts are coming in that could have cause problems with some of these uses. So the Friends of the Upper Delaware has been involved in some of this and trying to work with the state of New York to try to get these right. So with that, I'll say thanks. And that was your speed dating with the Clean Water Act.
Thank you, Daniel. That's a great picture. Love that picture. We have a 20-minute presentation from Tanya Dasky. Is Tanya with us? She is with the Academy of Natural Sciences.
Yes, I'm here.
And hi, Tanya. She's been working with SCGR and other partners on a headwater stream protection analysis in the context of climate resiliency. How did I do there, Tanya? I hope I did okay. And welcome. Thank you. And
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So I'm here once again to talk about our Headwaters project. I was here last year and I presented on this data. So I have a little bit more data this time. The Headwaters of the Delaware River project is a collaboration between Friends of the Upper Delaware River, Water Policy Pathways, Bloomsburg University, and the Academy of Natural Sciences. And we were funded by 2 grants, the NIFWF Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund and Pennsylvania's DEP's Growing Greener program. Headwater streams, first through third order, are vital to the health and resiliency of watersheds. They comprise nearly 90% of the river length worldwide and contribute disproportionately to biodiversity within a given stream network. Headwater streams serve as interfaces between the terrestrial and the aquatic and between groundwater and surface waters. And as such, they play a vital role in maintaining the resiliency of entire watersheds in the face of climate change through regulating temperature, hydrology, and biogeochemistry. So our goal for this project was to evaluate the resiliency of the headwater streams in the Delaware River to climate change by determining structure and function. To assess function, we collected metabolic data using loggers that were installed in every stream each summer. Loggers collected temperature for 3 or more months. Some of the streams we actually have an entire year of data. Water was taken at every stream to calculate dissolved organic carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen, as well as some other metrics. To understand structure of these streams, we collected various biota like algae and macroinvertebrates, and then we used novel techniques like tissue barcoding and eDNA to detect bacteria, mussels, and fish for a more complete picture. Our study has 51 sites that we sampled over 2 years, 2021 and 2022, and each site was either a first or a second order stream. To be clear, most of these sites were higher quality sites. We knew that picking sites with a higher percent of forest cover, our threshold was 50% or more, that would show us healthier streams, right? But what we wanted to do is to tease apart those subtle little changes that are occurring within these sites that would allow us to understand these changes at a larger scale. And just for fun, here's some pictures of how we collected the data. So all the way on the left there, that's Dr. Ryer's graduate student, and he's collecting algae off the rocks. And in the middle is my ANS team collecting bugs out of the cobble, like habitats or pools. And I'm all the way on the right there, that's me collecting water for our eDNA analysis. So because there's so many sites, there's no way I can show you all that data. So what we thought what would be best is just to highlight 3 streams as our focus sites for this presentation. They're going to be Yankee Run, which is in Pennsylvania, Abewood Brook, and Laundry Brook, and both those are in Sullivan County, New York. To give you an idea of what surrounds these streams, these are the maps of little sub-watersheds, right? And they show us the land cover for our 3 focus sites. Agriculture and developed land are the other 2 largest land uses besides forest in these particular watersheds. You'll notice that Abewood Brook right here has the highest percentage, over 80%, and Laundry Brook and Yankee Run both have about the same percent, a little bit over 60%. Yankee has a lot more developed land, that's that red portions. And Laundry Brook has a significant amount of agriculture. But to give you a better idea of land use, let's take all this data here and let's put it on a histogram and let's see what that looks like. So this graph represents the percent of watershed development for each of our sample sites. And you'll note that Yankee Run is a clear outlier. It has the highest amount of developed land and within the watershed, so it's like about 50%. This one is the percent of agriculture for all of the streams that we sampled, right? Laundry Brook is among the streams all the way here at the end that had the highest amount of agriculture within the watershed. So this is some of Dr. Ryer's from Bloomsburg University. This is his data. He installed loggers, that's these little guys over here, that collected data for a few months. And you can see what they look like in those photos there. These graphs just give us about 2 weeks of data. The number of days is here at the bottom of the graph. And you have temperature, dissolved oxygen, and PAR. PAR stands for photosynthetically active radiation. That's a fancy word, and all it means is that it's basically the wavelengths of sunlight that can be used by organisms for the photosynthesis. Abe Wood Brook is in orange, Laundry Brook is in green, and Yankee Run is in purple. And what these graphs tell us is that Laundry Brook has a really high amount of PAR, right? There's a fair amount of light getting to this stream, and this occurs in streams when a lower amount of tree canopy to cover that stream. And you can also see how the temperature at Laundry Brook is a little bit higher than the other 2 streams. And then Yankee Run, you'll see these big peaks, right, in purple at varying intervals. And these actually coincide with storm events. So after each storm, there would be a big spike in temperature and a drop in dissolved oxygen. And we found that for all sites in this study, that there's a relationship between the percentage of the human disturbed land, like development or agriculture, in upstream watersheds and the amount of variability in our summer stream temperatures for the streams that we sampled. Basically, as a result of the upstream development, rain events resulted in substantial increases in flow, which results in those short-term spikes in temperature and corresponding dips in dissolved oxygen. Basically, it's like think about it, it's probably like a flashy stream, right? It rains, lots of water. So let's take a look at what's inside of the streams. What's the stream habitat, right? So this graph shows us the substrate for our focus sites. It's presented as the percent of the total substrate, and our 3 focus sites are listed there at the bottom. Communities tend to be diverse and functional where habitat is stable. Habitat for macroinvertebrates is important as the more pollution intolerant groups tend to prefer areas with more cobble, like coarse gravel, small boulders. Those types of habitat provide the stable building blocks for macroinvertebrates and for fish. And so what I did was I colored those in brick texture just so you can see that our focus sites should have enough substrate for a stable habitat to support these communities. If you have the opposite, like a homogeneous habitat where you have like dominance by like one particular group, like fine gravel or sand, it could lead to higher impacts of scouring by storm flow than seen in the upstream and downstream areas. And you can see here that Laundry Brook and Yankee Run actually have a high percentage of fine gravel and sand. And as I mentioned earlier, Yankee is susceptible to these scouring events after storms. Now, let's switch a little bit again, and we're going to look at our biotic data. So this is the structure part of the streams that we were talking about. Here are some of the algal community parameters. I don't have everything listed here because it's just going to be too confusing, and I don't want to like make it even more difficult to wrap your head around what we're looking at. So algal biomass was highest at Laundry Brook. Remember, algal biomass is basically like how many of those algae organisms are there, right? And then the diatom multimetric index is just a number that we calculate that gives a score to the stream that's based on the diatom community. So the higher the score, the better the stream. Laundry Brook also had the lowest diatom multimetric index score. This score takes different kinds of information about the community to calculate it. A score between 0 and 3 gives the stream a poor rating, and a score between 3.33 and 6.66 is a fair rating. So based on this index, Laundry Brook has a poor rating, while Yankee and Abe Wood have a fair rating. Now, before I go into the macroinvertebrate data, I want to quickly review a term that I'm going to be using in a couple slides, and it's called EPT. EPT is just shorthand for 3 groups of insects that have a lower tolerance to pollution. And when they're found together and in high abundance, they can indicate a higher quality of stream. So E is for mayflies, P is for stoneflies, and T is for caddisflies. This graph shows us the number of individuals that are EPT out of the rest of the sample for our 3 focus sites. Here we can see that there aren't as many EPT individuals in Laundry Brook. So the EPT individuals is this yellow part. Laundry Brook and Yankee Run have less than our Abewood Brook site. So this is a graph of our IBI scores. So just like the diatoms, we can do this for macroinvertebrates. And this set IBI stands for the Index of Biotic Integrity. And it also is a type of scoring system that evaluates the quality of in-stream populations based on several metrics or categories. These metrics include that EPT richness, EPT abundance, Shannon diversity index, all different kinds of numbers, right? And with the score, you can again rate the stream as either poor, fair, or good. The IBI scores for our focus sites so that most of the streams fall into the fair, which is this area here in between the yellow and the green, or good, which is above the green line. Laundry Brook has the lowest score and Abewood Brook has the highest score. But how do these scores compare to land use? Let's go all the way back to where we started. This can be a little confusing. So if it's too hard to understand, just focus on the numbers that are listed here. This is a map of our focus sites, and the first one shows the percent forest compared to IBI scores, and the second one shows the impervious surface and how it compares to the IBI score. The percent forest and impervious surface numbers were pulled from the USGS National Land Cover Database. If you look at the legend up here, the darker the color, the higher the value. Land cover is green and IBI scores are in pink. And each site also has that information under the stream name in case this doesn't make sense to you, or if you can't see the colors real well. But what this tells us is that the IBI scores are higher when the percent forest is high and the impervious surface is low. Abewood Brook is our best site. It's the healthiest stream out of the 3. Yankee Run has the lowest percent forest and the highest percent impervious surfaces. And it seems as though the forest cover is actually helping to mitigate those impacts of the upstream development, but the effects can still be seen in that lower than IBI score. Laundry Brook has the lowest IBI score and the highest amount of agriculture. So this IBI score reflects that negative impact of agriculture. All right, so finally, I want to touch on our genetic analysis just because I think this is the coolest part of the study that we were able to do. We used an eDNA analysis at all of the sites. We sampled water and detritus. And what's eDNA? So I keep saying, what is eDNA? And that stands for environmental DNA, and it's defined as organismal DNA that can be found in the environment. It originates from cellular material shed by those organisms. So think like skin, poop, eggs, anything that's floating in the water. You can take that, sample it, and monitor it using the new methods. So this is how we did it. Like, this is the easiest way to do it. You can take a water sample, you push that water sample through a filter, and all the stuff that's in the water stays on that filter. Then you take the filter and you extract the DNA. And then you have to run it through a PCR amplification. Those 2 steps I don't do. I send it to somebody else to do those steps. But all that does is just extract the DNA, and then it makes a whole bunch of copies. And once you have those copies, you can then sequence it and compare those sequences to all the other species that are in the library, and then you get an identification for what you want. So what did our results show? Pretty cool. You can see that barcoding versus traditional methods of identification. Traditional methods are like me sitting at a microscope for hours and months and, just trying to identify things. Barcoding obviously has way more species identified than if we use those traditional methods. The traditional methods also, this is about, both sites, I think actually the number should be 188. So sorry about that, didn't update that. But the insects for barcoding is 351. The other great thing about this method is that I can get results for birds, amphibians, mammals, all things that I probably wouldn't be looking for. Another point that I really want to make is that most of the error rates are higher in traditional methods, and we kill all those macroinvertebrates that we collect. That's the only way that we can identify them. And most fish survive electrofishing, but there can be casualties. So another benefit of eDNA barcoding is finding rare, threatened, or endangered species. Here's one example. This is a dragonfly, the ocellated darner. This dragonfly's eDNA was found at Laundry Brook, which is indicated by this little point here. And in New York State, this species is listed as vulnerable. So now we know that this species was at Laundry Brook in 2021, and we have a data point. We know where this species has been, and we can track that over time. So what are the main takeaways? Because I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you, so I want to kind of summarize everything so that you can understand it a little bit better. The main takeaways are both agriculture and development within the watershed have negative impacts to the health of the stream and the biota that live there. Watersheds that have land cover that includes agriculture have streams with higher nutrients, higher algal biomass, and lower numbers of pollution-sensitive insects. And watersheds with a higher amount of developed land cover have streams that are flashier with more extreme temperature swings during storm events. And streams with more than 50% forest cover are still experiencing those negative impacts of the upstream impervious surfaces. What the threshold is, I know that's probably going to be a question. So what's the threshold that eliminates this threat of the developed land? We are trying to figure that out now. There's 50 sites worth of data. We picked these couple focus sites to try and highlight some of those changes. As soon as I have a threshold, I will let everyone know. Because forest cover does matter, right? It helps maintain healthier streams. But we are seeing that there's a limit to what it can do. So as the percent goes down, the impacts from that human development will go up. And my final point is genetic tools can enable us to gain an understanding of biodiversity in these ecosystems without removing or harming any animals, which I think is a really good benefit of this method. And I went really fast trying to catch up our time. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Tanya. We're going to wait for questions till the end.
Okay.
Can we hear me, Molly? Can everybody on Zoom hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, the final session of the day, we're going to talk about the presence of the National Park Service in the Upper Delaware River and the various, three institutions that are the driving force of it, including the National Park Service itself, the nonprofit sector, the National Parks Conservation Association. Tim is here. But first, we're going to hear from Lori Ramey, who's been with us many times before, who is the director of the Upper Delaware Council. She plays a really important role with our local governments up and down the river. Thank you, Lori, for coming. And I also might add that the council has been with us all the way on our state funding campaign. It was a very important partner, and we really appreciate that. So, Lori, thank you for coming, and you're on.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. So I've been asked to summarize the Upper Delaware Council in about 7 minutes for our 35-year history. So I welcome your ruthless timekeeper because I need that. But I did prepare some notes here to try to stay on track. Actually, I'm going to go back 45 years to start because the UDC was born out of an act of Congress that was the congressional legislation that created the Upper Delaware Scenic Recreational River, which, of course, as you probably know, is 73.4 miles of the Upper Delaware from the confluence of the East and West Branch in Hancock down to Railroad Bridge number 2 specifically, which is in Mill Rift, Pennsylvania. And that encompasses 55,574.5 acres of property, which is primarily privately owned. That makes it unique in the world of national park units at that time, certainly, and it encompasses 2 states, 5 counties in New York and PA, and 15 different municipalities. The enabling legislation that was passed in '78 required the development of a plan that was based on a formal partnership of the local, state, and federal governments to cooperatively manage the conservation and protection of the river's outstandingly remarkable values. It also called for establishing an Upper Delaware Council to ensure the effective implementation of the plan and oversee its administration on a continuing basis using the existing authority of its members, including a reliance on local land use zoning. So the River Management Plan took about 17 or 18 drafts to actually hammer out this agreement. It was ripped apart and started over numerous times, very tumultuous review, controversial at the time, lots of skepticism about the federal government coming in and what that would mean to the landowners and their rights. Ultimately, the successful approach finally proved to be a bottoms-up one in which a conference of Upper Delaware Townships was empowered of stakeholders in the area to write this plan and get it through to an acceptable agreement that all of the parties signed on to. State, we have 13 of our 15 eligible local members have joined, along with New York State, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are voting members. We are a 501c3 organization that operates under a cooperative agreement with the National Park Service as our federal partner, and the Delaware River Basin Commission is a non-voting member. We're located in the same building there that you see that Coop once occupied in the previous slide. And Jeff asked if that was me in the first photo, and I said, I have been around a long time, but not that long. So no, that was from the 1970s. I was but a child then. We do have two of our board members are with us today. We have Steve Adams in the back from Damascus Township, and Fred Peckham is on Zoom, and he is from here in the town of Hancock. So this is our mission, which, as you can see, is very broad, it's ambitious, and it touches virtually every aspect of what makes the Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River so special. Unfortunately, the UDC has been challenged by a financial structure that was either not fulfilled in the case of our member states have never contributed their anticipated 20% shares of operational funding, or in the case of our federal contribution, has remained flat with no inflationary adjustments for the line item that we received through the National Park Service Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational Rivers budget. That result is that the UDC's attempt is to survive on a status quo 60% share of the intended budget 35 years later, which simply is not sustainable. We're still operating on the same $300,000 annual level that we got in 1988. And you can see some statistics there of what that would have been if it had inflated with a consumer price index, and what the value of it truly is today. And as our chairperson, Erin Robinson from Shahola Township says, it doesn't take an accountant to realize that the UDC is running on fumes. The council has been forced to curtail its activities accordingly. Our volunteer board members, who are appointed by their governmental bodies to represent their interests, are
I'm sorry to
supported by a
interrupt, but the sound has cut out for the people on Zoom.
Not totally.
Not for me.
I can hear okay.
Okay,
Me too.
Okay. Right, so needless to say, with the flat federal funding situation, we've had to have some cutbacks in the programs that we offer, the services to our membership, and the staffing, which had once been anticipated at 5 full-time positions, has been down to 3 since 2012. And we had commissioned an independent study from a fiscal environmental economist who has quantified that within 5 years, we'll have to lose another staff position. And that will be very difficult to operate under that circumstance, since our board members are essentially volunteers. So in the study that we commissioned in December 2021, this was a fiscal sustainability study to actually look at the numbers and project where we are, and also come up with the ecosystem service value that the UDC provides to its members and the community, and basically, we are in trouble. One important note to make is that the UDC's work in conservation has spin-off benefits beyond its services, not only to provide a forum for its membership to agree upon the joint actions that affect the river valley, and to review the land use development projects against the land and water use guidelines, but also these statistics here demonstrate that the Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River is an important economic driver for our region, which cannot be taken for granted, that we do bring something to the table. This is what I call my lightning round here, because I'm going to show you just very quick images of the Upper Delaware, and this also indicates the work that the UDC is involved with. So, many of these will be recognizable with the flooding that we've encountered and the events we get involved with, such as Delaware River Sojourn. We sponsor a raft trip to introduce people to the resource and invite their stewardship. We also, since 2021, have started an Upper Delaware Litter Sweep, which has been very popular in all 15 of our River Valley communities. We give out funds for our members who want to participate in river and shoreline cleanups. We also hold the only River Valley Awards Banquet, which is on the New York and Pennsylvania side, to recognize those unsung heroes. Our keynote speaker this year was Congressman Molinaro, who we heard from earlier. We have all sorts of meetings. Our work flows through 3 committees called Water Use and Resource Management, Operations and Project Review, as well as the full council, which meets once a month. Here we were getting a presentation from Jen Grigliano from New York City DEP about the dewatering exercise, which started last week. We also offer our members technical assistance grants to make sure that their zoning and comprehensive plans are up to par and compatible with the goals and objectives of the river management plan. And we also have been fortunate to receive some grant funding to allow us to pass through to projects such as the Damascus Township Playground, which is shown there. And we just keep our eyes in whatever is going on that might affect the land or the water in any sense. One big victory we had over the years was beating the NYRE Power Lines, New York Regional Interconnect. And then that is a solar project going on there for all of the newer technologies that have advanced since the 1986 River Management Plan. And in general, we're here to celebrate, protect, and conserve the river. And I will leave you with this inspirational and cautionary tale from the 3 members of Congress back in 1988 when the UDC was first establishing itself. They had this to say to talk about the importance of this management framework, the uniqueness of the cooperative nature of it, and to say that if this conservation plan is taken seriously, 50 years from now, when the Upper Delaware is still a quality river, your children and their children will thank you for the steps you are taking today. And there is how you can get in touch with us to learn more about the UDC stories and activities. And I yield to Superintendent Lindsay Kurnath.
Thank you, Lord.
Sophie, near one of these guys. Where is my I wasn't gonna make a PowerPoint, and then Lori sent that one, and I was like, well, I better at least have a picture. So that's what we've got. We have one picture. There you go, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Lindsay Kurnath. I am the superintendent of Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River. I've been on the job since middle to late January. So I'm, my new kid card is getting a little faded, so I won't get to call myself a newbie for too much longer. Just a little bit about me. I am 15 years into my federal career, 13 of them with the National Park Service. I started my career in our Washington, D.C. offices, and then I moved from there out to Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State. And from there to Fire Island National Seashore, and then most recently here. So I've had the chance to experience a lot of the country and understand a lot of the different issues that are facing the national park units. But this is my first river. So we had glaciers and lots of water and snow to deal with at Mount Rainier. At Fire Island, I had the ocean, and here is the river. So that's been very exciting for me. And I think also probably relevant to this group, I am the daughter of an avid fisherman, who, has been tying his own flies for as long as I can remember. And, some of you may have heard me say this already, but when I got this job, I called my parents to tell them, my mom was like, started on the congratulations, and my dad's first question was, okay, well, so when do you think you're gonna be there? Because then I'm gonna start planning my fishing trip. So, and then he did get around to a congratulations, but, the opportunities, presented by the fisheries and this amazing river are certainly near and dear to my family's heart and my dad's, so. That's a little bit about me, and where I came from. I'm happy to answer any other questions later if people have them. I wanted to zoom out just a little bit and talk about why the National Park Service is here. So the 282 miles of the Delaware River, it's the longest undammed river on the East Coast, and that allows for our sea-run migratory species to come all the way in from the Atlantic Ocean, all the way up here, spawn, and then make their way back down to the ocean, where they get to live out the rest of their life. And being one of 3 segments of the Delaware River that are protected under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, is something that I think is unique for us and really an important part of what it is we're doing here. So not all wild and scenic rivers are managed by the National Park Service, but this particular one we're celebrating in the Upper Delaware is. But I think it's interesting to look at the entirety of the 282 miles of the Delaware River, because you actually have, I think, all the different models of, at least in the Park Service, how a wild and scenic river could be managed. So you've got the Delaware Water Gap section, the middle Delaware, which has federal land on either side of the river, and that's how that section of river and the integrity of it is protected. Down in the lower Delaware, it is entirely partnership run. We do have a National Park Service manager who oversees the lower Delaware, but it's a very different model. And up here, in large part because of the lessons learned in the creation of the Delaware Water Gap and what the communities up here wanted, we have the Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River and the partnership between the National Park Service and the UDC. And this whole partnership approach to how we're protecting the river and bringing in local land management and partnerships to make everybody part of the success of protecting what this river is all about. And just to give the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, there's a little bit of a plug. So all rivers protected under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act are undammed. They have exceptional water, so that means they're free flowing. That's the value that is represented by not having dams. So they have a free-flowing nature, they have exceptional water quality. Here in the Upper Delaware, we actually have special protection waters so it's kind of like water quality bonus for us, here in the Upper Delaware. And then lastly, each river, when it's established, has outstandingly remarkable values, which are the special things, in the Park Service staff and joke, each park unit, is its own special snowflake. But we all come together to form a blizzard, so on some level, but each wild and scenic river also has those outstandingly remarkable values that we're here to protect. But I think the Upper Delaware section and why I am in part so excited to be here and learn and contribute to the management, I think this is a really interesting management model, and the reliance and the importance of all the partnerships and all the different players who are coming together to protect all the different aspects of the river, whether we're talking about the main stem or the tributaries or anything else. It is also important for us to be working on this, working to protect the river and all the special things in it together. And I think that's just an incredibly cool opportunity that we have. And I hope you all see the National Park Service as a partner in doing that together. I will say one of the unique challenges we have is that my job and the leadership above me, we are ultimately responsible for making sure that the objectives of the river management plan are met. So we are in fact somewhat responsible for what happens within 55,000 acres of land, but we only own 30 acres. So that definitely has had some presents some unique challenges and opportunities as we all get to work together. So Jeff had queued up that maybe as the new superintendent, I should talk a little bit about what's in my windshield, just kind of what I have observed and what's what we're gonna be focusing on, at least for the upcoming, months and years, as we're really starting to get the ball rolling here. So, I will acknowledge there's been a lot of change and turnover in the Upper Delaware National Park Service staff. So, I don't know if any of you had the chance to meet Joe Salvatore. He was the superintendent here for not particularly long. And before him, there was I think, kind of a protracted length of time between the previous superintendent, Chris Heister, and on to Joe. So, and we've had quite a bit of staff turnover as well. So I just, want to acknowledge that through all of that turnover, I think we've potentially lost some of those connections, particularly to the community and to all of our partners that were really best serving the entire corridor. I've got 1 minute. Okay, so, so over the next several years, you'll see us investing in those reconnections. Our presence in the community. So we haven't necessarily kept pace with technology and tools that are available to us to ensure that we're getting information out to the public in a really timely manner. So we're bringing somebody in to help us really revamp, in particular, our digital presence. Expanding on who we're connecting to, maybe have seen some of our water safety signs that are now out there in different languages. We're gonna keep investing in that, having rangers who can speak different languages when they're out there at the kiosks. We also have a really cool opportunity to work with SUNY ESF this year to bring some Haudenosaunee youth back to the area, so that's the Eel Clan, bringing them back to reconnect with their ancestral lands, and hopefully rebuild that connection to that community. And then lastly, I hope you'll see us asking some questions of how the Park Service can be more of a resource to the river and the community itself. So we're trying to be out in the field more. We're trying to figure out how we can get our some additional staff to get rangers up here to the northern sections of the river, particularly during fishing season. And then also helping to facilitate conversations and help identify opportunities to better connect and be, hopefully serve as a liaison and a way to bring everybody together to work in this collaborative model. So, thank you. Stopwatch too. I'm excited. Sorry about that.
All right. So we heard from Lori and we heard from Lindsay. My name is Timothy Leonard. I'm the Northeast Program Manager at National Parks Conservation Association. So with Lori representing the local interests and municipalities here and Lindsay representing the federal government, the National Park Service, I like to think of National Parks Conservation Association as sort of the in-between. We are a national organization. We're based down in Washington, D.C. We're a National Parks and Public Lands Advocacy Group. We've been around for 104 years. We were started in 1919, which is just 3 years after the National Park Service. And we were established by the same folks who created the National Park Service because they really thought there should be an external watchdog to make sure that the Park Service was fulfilling, at the time, the 1916 Organic Act, which is the legislation that created the National Park Service. And that's what we do to this day. That's what we've done. We are an advocacy group. We make sure to work with different community members. We make sure to work with congressional offices and the Park Service federal agency to make sure that everybody's holding up their ends of the Organic Act, making sure that these parks are protected. What's our mission? So NPCA, National Parks Conservation Association, we are there to protect and enhance national parks and public lands for future generations, very simply. I would love to see a show of hands in the room if you've seen the Ken Burns documentary, National Parks. Okay, so a lot of people have, but it's called America's Best Idea. I sometimes call our organization America's Best Kept Secret. We're not very well known, even though we are a national organization.
Hey, everybody, I think we lost audio.
So we're back. So we've been around for a long time, but we often work behind the scenes. We work very closely with park partners like Friends of the Upper Delaware, like Lori's group, EDC, to make sure that everyone is collaborating, to make sure that the best interests of the park are at heart. We want to make sure we're establishing congressional champions who can go to Congress and not only advocate for park funding, in this case, the Upper Delaware, but also make sure that they're passing park-friendly legislation, whether that's environmental, whether that's dealing with development, whether that's dealing with all types of issues at the federal level. We really want to make sure that we're taking those local community voices, these regional voices, and bringing them to the decision making. The agency is acting in the best interest for the people who live, recreate, visit, and utilize the park. I like to think of our priorities as the 3 E's: educate, engage, and empower. One of our real priorities at NPCA is to educate people about the Park Service, about the national parks that are in their neighborhoods. Like Lindsay said when she came up here, and like Jeff mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't know that they have park sites in their communities. You know, they might live adjacent to one or next door. But if you're not one of the big Yellowstones or Yosemites or Grand Canyons, a lot of people just don't know that the federal government sometimes is there, that there is a park site there that provides the same resources, recreational opportunities for all types of folks, all generations to visit. We want to make sure people are educated about those abilities, those parks, those places to enjoy and learn. And then we want to make sure that they engage with them. We want to make sure that they get out to these parks and have powerful experiences where they get to go down the river, they get to fish, they get to hike, they get to see the beauty that the country has, they get to see the beauty that the Upper Delaware has. Just a few weeks ago, I brought a colleague here who lives in Virginia, and we were coming up 17, and she was bowled over. She was astounded by how beautiful it was. I told her, well, come here in a few weeks when the leaves are at their peak, you'll be even more amazed. But she said, I'm going to move up here. She's ready to come here. But it's having those experiences of being in a park site, being in nature, and being on the river, that transforms you. And we at NPCA try to make sure we are facilitating those really powerful experiences, not just for visitors, not just for people who want to recreate there, but also for advocates, people who care about the parks and hopefully can communicate that to elected officials, like Representative Molinaro, who was here earlier this morning, who's slowly turning out to be one of our biggest champions, not only for the Upper Delaware, but for national parks writ large. That's the kind of path that NPCA facilitates. We want to make sure we educate decision makers and locals, people who love the parks, and then teach them, connect them, how to connect to decision makers and elected officials who can bring about change in the Park Service agency. Educate, engage, and empower. Those are our 3 E's at NPCA. It's exactly 3 o'clock now, so I don't want to go too much longer, but I'll stop there, and I think we were going to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Jim. Sorry you had to be the last speaker of the day.
So great.
Any questions for our National Parks folks? I want to thank everybody for hanging in there in a warm room all day. I hope you all come back tomorrow. Tomorrow's topics are going to be slightly different. We're talking more about the reservoirs and the fishery and the role of the New York State DEC and all the recent work they've done with the fishery. And so thank you again. Thanks to all of our speakers and everybody on Zoom. Appreciate you hanging in there with us through the day. And yeah, have a safe drive home, or if you're hanging out here, let us know. Maybe we can figure out something to do. Sherry, anything else we need to tell people? Okay, you had that look on your face. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.